Hello everyone, and welcome back to Gone Legends. In today's video, we will be honoring American celebrities who sadly passed away today and over the last few days, as well as notable figures from around the world whose loss has touched many. Before we begin, we would truly appreciate your support. Please take a moment to like this video. Your kindness helps us continue sharing these stories. Thank you. And now, let us start.
Bob Weir? Bob Weir was born in 1947, and by the time the world truly understood what he was building, it was already too late to separate his name from the myth of American music. The Grateful Dead were never just a band. They were a moving town, a traveling religion, a language of improvisation spoken fluently by people who didn't even know they were searching for it until the first time a song stretched longer than it should. And the crowd realized they weren't watching a performance, they were inside it. Bob was there at the beginning, when youth still felt immortal and the 1960s were cracking open like an electric storm. He was young, so young it's almost unbelievable now to picture him stepping into a musical revolution with that kind of confidence. But that was Bob Weir, a rhythm guitarist who refused to be background, a singer who could sound like sunlight and dust in the same breath, a writer who understood that some of the biggest emotions are best delivered with a wink, a shuffle, and a melody you can't shake for decades. He helped create songs that didn't just chart, they lived. Sugar Magnolia, One More Saturday Night, Truckin', Playing in the Band, Cassidy, Throwing Stones, titles that became shorthand for entire memories in the minds of millions. The Grateful Dead story is filled with legends of endless roads, of nights that blurred into mornings, of fans who followed the music like it was home, but inside that legend was always craft. And Bob's rhythm guitar, often misunderstood by those who only listen for flashy leads, was the architecture, the bones, the nervous system that held the whole beast together. After Jerry Garcia died in 1995, many assumed the story would close, that the curtain would finally fall. But Bob wasn't built for final curtains. He carried the torch forward, not as an imitation of what was lost, but as a continuation of what was still alive. He became, in many ways, the most recognizable steward of the Dead's spirit in the decades that followed, through different lineups, different eras, different stages, but always the same promise. The music isn't a museum piece. It's a living thing. And then, in the winter of 22/6, the news arrived like a cold wind through an open door. Bob Weir died on January 10, 2026, at the age of 78. Reports said he had battled cancer and ultimately succumbed to underlying lung issues, passing peacefully surrounded by loved ones. When someone like Bob Weir leaves, the loss isn't confined to one genre or one fan base. It moves outward, through every musician who learned that rhythm can be as daring as lead, through every songwriter who discovered you can be profound without pretending to be solemn, through every deadhead who ever found belonging in a crowd of strangers singing the same chorus as if it were a prayer. Tributes poured in. Fellow founders, bandmates, and the wider music world spoke about what he meant not just as a performer, but as a force. Bill Kreutzmann, one of the last remaining original voices connected to those earliest days, remembered him with the kind of tenderness that only comes from a friendship measured in decades, not years. And the thing about Bob Weir is that even if you weren't there in the height, even if you never stood in a field while a jam turned the night into something sacred, you still felt him. Because his music seeped into American culture like folklore. You hear it in the way modern jam bands build their sets. You hear it in the way crowds still hunger for live experiences that feel unpredictable and human. You hear it in the idea that community can be created not by perfection, but by shared surrender to the moment. Bob Weir's legacy is not a statue, it's motion. It's a highway at midnight. It's a song that refuses to end because nobody in the room wants it to. It's the kind of artistry that reminds you being the rhythm can mean being the heartbeat of an entire era. And as we move from Bob's long, luminous road, we turn toward another life shorter in years, but packed with chapters that read like a film: talent, collision, consequence, survival, and a final quiet ending that arrived too soon. John Forte. John Forte was born in 1975, and his story carries the kind of contradictions that make a person unforgettable: classical training and street poetry, industry success and prison walls, a voice that moved between worlds: hip-hop and orchestration, fame and anonymity, punishment and redemption, like he was always searching for a place where the whole truth of him could fit. He grew up connected to music early, reportedly beginning with instruments like the violin, and by the time he entered the orbit of New York's hip-hop scene, he wasn't just trying to rap, he was trying to build, to compose, to shape sound the way architects shape skylines. His rise wasn't the kind that starts with a viral moment. It started the old way: relationships, respect, late nights, work that spreads by word of mouth. He moved through circles where talent is the only currency that matters, and eventually that currency spent big. Lauryn Hill introduced him to the Fugees in the early 1990s, and suddenly John Forte was helping create one of the defining albums of an era. When the Fugees released The Score in 1996, it wasn't just successful, it was seismic. It blended hip-hop with soul, reggae, and emotional storytelling, and it carried a tension that felt honest, the pull between street reality and spiritual yearning, between survival and artistry. Forte's contributions earned him a Grammy nomination at a remarkably young age, and for many artists, that would be the beginning of a smooth climb. But life doesn't always follow the arc we expect. Sometimes it swerves, sometimes it shatters. In 2000, Forte was arrested on drug trafficking charges and received a long mandatory sentence, 14 years, a punishment that became part of his public identity, whether he wanted it to or not. And here is where his story turns from the familiar rise and fall narrative into something more human, and, in a strange way, more moving. Because inside incarceration, where many people disappear, John Forte kept creating. Music became his oxygen. He recorded and worked on projects even while locked away, and his second album, I, John, became a symbol of creative persistence, proof that bars can hold a body, but not always the mind. And then came the unlikely chorus of advocates. Carly Simon, among others, became involved in supporting his case, lending her voice to the belief that punishment should not mean permanent erasure. In November 2008, President George W. Bush commuted his sentence, and John Forte walked back into the world with a second chance that few receive. How do you rebuild a life after that? After fame and prison and headlines? After the public decides who you are based on a few chapters they never even read closely? Forte did it by returning to the thing that always made him real, making music. He collaborated, he performed, he wrote. And in later years, he became a presence in Martha's Vineyard's music scene, living a quieter, more grounded life, one shaped not just by career but by family. Then, in January 2066, the news arrived with a bluntness that still doesn't feel fair. John Forte died on Monday, January 12, 2026, at his home in Chilmark, Massachusetts, on Martha's Vineyard. He was 50. Reports said he was found unresponsive. Authorities reported no sign of foul play, and the official cause of death had not been publicly released, though it was noted he had experienced a serious health crisis involving a seizure about a year earlier. 50. An age where a person is supposed to be entering a new kind of creative maturity. An age where the story is supposed to widen, not close. He left behind his wife and children and a body of work that reminds us how complicated a legacy can be. Some people only know him as the Fugees producer. Others only know him through the lens of his conviction. But the full story is bigger than either label. It's about a person who lived with consequence, who survived a system that swallows many whole, and who still tried to make something beautiful on the other side. His final album, Vessels, Angels, and Ancestors, released in 2021, reads now like an accidental farewell title. A reminder that we all carry vessels. We all search for angels. We all become ancestors in someone's memory eventually. And as we move from the stage lights of rock history and the bruised poetry of hip-hop redemption, we step into a different kind of legacy, one drawn in ink, syndicated in thousands of papers, and understood by anyone who ever sat in a fluorescent office wondering if the meeting would ever end. Barbara Lawrence. Barbara Lawrence, the longtime Hollywood talent manager, was born in 1943. And while actors and musicians stand in the light, managers often live in the shadow, quietly shaping careers, protecting clients, guiding decisions that the public will never see. She was not the person on the poster. She was the person who helped the person on the poster survive the pressure of becoming a brand. In the entertainment industry, longevity is a rare kind of power. Barbara Lawrence had it. She worked across decades, representing and managing talent through changing eras, old Hollywood habits fading into new media realities, fame accelerating, careers rising and collapsing faster than ever. Reports described her as a longtime manager whose clients included prominent names. She was noted as the longtime manager of Rue McClanahan and Alan Ratchins, and she had ties to other major figures across television and film. Her work was the kind that doesn't get applause. It gets phone calls at midnight. It gets crisis meetings in quiet offices. It gets negotiation tables and hard conversations and the responsibility of telling a client the truth when everyone else is selling comfort. A manager, at the highest level, is part strategist, part protector, part emotional anchor. And that kind of job done for decades requires a certain personality, steady hands, sharp instincts, and a willingness to carry stress that the world never thanks you for, because when things go right, the star gets the credit. When things go wrong, the manager is one of the first people blamed. Barbara Lawrence's story surfaced widely in January 2026 when reports confirmed she died on January 2, 2026 in Manhattan while on a family vacation. She was 82, and reports described her death as due to natural causes. There is a quiet sadness in that detail, a family vacation, a moment that's supposed to be gentle, a pause from the grind. And yet, life does what it does, ending stories in places that don't feel dramatic enough to match the life that came before. She leaves behind family, colleagues, and a long thread of careers. She touched people whose successes were shaped, in part, by her judgment and her dedication. And perhaps that is the most fitting legacy for someone like Barbara Lawrence, not a spotlight, but a constellation. A network of lives and projects that carry forward because she once helped hold them together. In Hollywood, where so much is built on illusion, managers often become the most real people in the room. They see behind the smiles, behind the red carpets, behind the narrative. They deal with fear and burnout and uncertainty. They help artists remain artists when the industry tries to turn them into products. And when someone like that is gone, the loss is felt in quiet ways. Fewer steady voices on the other end of the line, fewer protectors who know what it costs to endure. Scott Adams. Scott Adams was born in 1957, and for a long time, his greatest talent was observation, quiet, sharp, and sometimes merciless. He looked at corporate culture the way a satirist looks at a parade, not as a celebration, but as a strange ritual full of costumes and unspoken rules. Out of that observation came Dilbert, first published in 1989, a comic strip that transformed office misery into shared laughter and turned the white-collar grind into a universal punchline. Dilbert wasn't just jokes, it was recognition. It was a mirror held up to an entire class of workers who felt unseen by the culture that benefited from them. And it arrived at the perfect time when corporate life was expanding, when management speak was becoming its own language, when technology was changing offices faster than human beings could adjust. Adams drew on his own experience working in corporate roles, and he built a cast that felt painfully familiar. Dilbert, the competent engineer drowning in nonsense, the pointy-haired boss, clueless and confident, co-workers trapped in systems designed less for productivity than for survival. The strip soared. It spawned best-selling books, including The Dilbert Principle, and it expanded into merchandise and an animated series. For a time, Scott Adams was one of the most recognized cartoonists in America, a man who translated the soul drain of the modern workplace into something people could laugh at, because laughing was sometimes the only way to endure it. But legacies are rarely simple, and Scott Adams' later years became increasingly controversial. He moved deeper into political commentary, and his public statements, especially in the early 2020s, led many newspapers to drop Dilbert, transforming him from a widely syndicated humorist into a polarizing figure. And then, beyond the public arguments and the headlines, there was the private reality that no controversy can protect you from: the body's betrayal. In May 2025, Adams publicly said he had metastatic prostate cancer and only months to live, and he spoke openly about his health battle. He continued broadcasting and writing through treatments, turning his final months into a strange, raw public diary, part defiance, part farewell. Scott Adams died on January 13, 2066, at the age of 68. Multiple reports confirmed his death was announced by his ex-wife, Shelley Miles, during a live stream, and that he had been battling aggressive prostate cancer. There is something uniquely haunting about a satirist facing mortality. A person who spent his life exposing absurdity, now reduced to the simple truth the body cannot negotiate with: time ends. And whatever you think of Scott Adams, Whatever opinion you hold about his later years, there is still that human moment at the center of it, a person confronting the end, and a world deciding how to remember the whole story without pretending the hard parts never happened. Because people are rarely one thing, and history, if it's honest, is complicated. Scott Adams leaves behind a cultural artifact that still lives on in the language of office life. Even now, people describe bad management in Dilbert terms. They reference the pointy-haired boss without needing to explain the joke. That is, influence deep, invisible, embedded. And it's a reminder that humor can become a survival tool for millions, even when its creator becomes a figure they struggle to reconcile. And from the artist who worked in ink and controversy, we turn to a name many people never knew until now, yet her influence has been sitting behind famous faces for decades. Cher. Cher was born Cherilyn Sarkeesian in 1946 into a life that never promised stability, comfort, or certainty. From the very beginning, her world was shaped by movement and disruption. Her mother, Georgia Holt, was a singer and actress whose own dreams brushed against Hollywood but never quite found a permanent home. Her father, John Sarkeesian, struggled with addiction and left early, creating an absence that would echo through Cher's childhood in quiet but powerful ways. Growing up, Cher moved constantly. Different cities, different schools, different apartments. She learned early how to be the outsider, the girl who didn't quite belong, the girl with the deep voice, the striking features, the face that didn't fit neatly into the narrow beauty standards of the time. She was dyslexic, struggled academically, and often felt misunderstood. But beneath that uncertainty was something fierce and immovable, a sense that she was meant for more than invisibility. As a teenager, she dropped out of high school and moved to Los Angeles, chasing something she couldn't yet name. She took acting classes, worked odd jobs, and slept on couches. And then, in the early 1960s, her life shifted when she met Sonny Bono, a musician, producer, and hustler with a gift for recognizing raw potential. Their relationship was complicated from the start, personal, professional, creative, and deeply imbalanced in power. But together, they created something the world couldn't ignore. When Sonny and Cher emerged, they didn't look like anyone else. Long hair, bell-bottoms, a mix of folk, pop, and counterculture cool. Their breakout hit, I Got You Babe, released in 1965, didn't just climb the charts, it became an anthem of youthful devotion, innocence, and rebellion. Suddenly, Cher's voice, low, unmistakable, emotional, was everywhere. Radios, televisions, living rooms across America. But success came with control. Sonny managed every aspect of their career and finances, often leaving Cher without autonomy or credit. On the outside, they were a glamorous, smiling duo. On the inside, Cher felt trapped, underestimated, and erased as an individual. Still, she performed. She learned. She watched. And quietly, she prepared for a life beyond being half of a duo. The Sonny and Cher Comedy Hour made them television royalty in the early 1970s, blending humor, music, and fashion in a way that defined an era. Cher's style alone became legendary, bold, daring, unapologetic. But as the show thrived, their marriage collapsed. When Cher finally left Sonny, she left with almost nothing financially. No control over her past earnings, no safety net, just her name and the will to survive. What followed was one of the most extraordinary reinventions in entertainment history. Cher began again, alone. She took acting seriously even when critics laughed. She accepted roles that required vulnerability, grit, and restraint, things the public didn't expect from a pop star in sequins. And then came Silkwood in 1983, where she stunned audiences and critics alike with her raw, grounded performance. The laughter stopped. The respect began. That respect deepened with Mask, Suspect, and finally Moonstruck in 1987, the film that would define her as a serious actress. As Loretta Castorini, Cher delivered a performance full of humor, pain, longing, and truth. She won the Academy Award for Best Actress, standing on the Oscar stage not as Sonny's partner, not as a novelty, but as a fully realized artist who had earned her place. Music, however, never let her go. Throughout the decades, Cher returned to sound again and again, each time transformed. Rock, pop, disco, ballads, dance. When the industry tried to label her too old, she answered with Believe in 1998, a song that didn't just revive her career, it redefined modern pop production. The song introduced auto-tune as a stylistic choice and became a global phenomenon. Her image, once criticized for being too much, became iconic. She didn't adapt to the industry adapted to her. Behind the glamour, Cher's life was filled with pain. Romantic relationships that burned brightly and collapsed painfully. Public scrutiny that never stopped. A fierce, lifelong dedication to her children, especially her son Chaz, whose journey she supported with unwavering love despite intense public backlash. She became a vocal advocate for LGBTQ rights long before it was safe or popular, using her platform to protect, defend, and amplify voices that were silenced. Cher was never perfect. She was outspoken, stubborn, emotional, sometimes divisive, but she was always honest. She never pretended to be smaller to make others comfortable. She never apologized for surviving. As the years passed, she became something more than a performer. She became a symbol of resilience, of reinvention, of feminine power that doesn't fade quietly. She toured relentlessly, performed farewell tours that were never truly farewell, and continued to command stages with the same fire she had in her 20s, only now sharpened by experience. Cher's legacy is not contained in awards or sales numbers, though she has plenty of both. Her legacy lives in every artist who refuses to be boxed in every woman told she's too old to matter, in every voice that doesn't fit the mold but sings anyway. She showed the world that survival can be glamorous, that reinvention can be radical, and that longevity is its own rebellion. She is Cher, one name, one voice, one life that spanned generations and genres, refusing to dim. And whether she is remembered for a love song, a defiant anthem, a dramatic performance, or a glittering stage entrance, the truth remains the same. The world is different because she was in it. This is Gone Legends, and this is a legacy that will never fade.